Good evening, everybody, and welcome back once again to Maximus the Fourth. I recently have sold one vintage bottle of Pepsi Blue. About a month ago, I sold a different one. In today's video, I'm going to go over with you the current deal that I made with the guy on eBay. Let you know what I made, but more than anything, what this video is going to follow is the shakiness of the market when it comes to these original vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue from the States. And I'm just going to kind of tell you how the prices have shifted as the years have gone on, and starting all the way back basically in 2018. So here we go. So most of you guys already know this by now, but in 2018, after Pepsi Blue had been discontinued for 14 years, the LA Beast posted a video called Rare Discontinued Sodas Taste Test. And in the thumbnail, he had a vintage bottle of Pepsi Blue that he was featuring in there. And this was after the LA Beast had a successful campaign to bring back Crystal Pepsi. In the video, what he does is he holds up the bottle of Pepsi Blue, does the pitch, everything, you name it. And then he says, just like he did with Crystal Pepsi, if anybody from Pepsi is listening, let's bring back the Pepsi Blue. Now, by this point, Pepsi had so much respect for the LA Beast because of what he did to bring back Crystal Pepsi that they kind of looked at the video and they're like, yeah, we're kind of to the point to where if the LA Beast tells us to do something, we're just going to do it. And so, by that point, before that video of the LA Beast, nobody really cared much about these vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue. There's maybe one other guy that I can think of that might have had them, like Joelner. He's a Pepsi content creator. He'll do videos every single time a new Pepsi product comes out. But other than him, the LA Beast was really the only one who really brought up the hype. But even Joelner had never posted a video about vintage Pepsi Blue until the current one had come out in 2021. So what happened is that people started getting interested in these bottles, and the first tangible video that came out after the LA Beast just so happened to be by my twin brother, Parker Goodwin, where he made a video called Pepsi Blue Movement. He went on eBay to buy a vintage bottle of Pepsi Blue about a year after the LA Beast for roughly $53.14, and he had petitioned and made a video, shout out to the LA Beast, because of what he had done, and he had really hyped it up, and he had gotten 9 different people in the comments to leave a hashtag comment, bring back Pepsi Blue, and his video to this very day stands at 724 views. So I will leave the description of that video down in the description of this video if you want to go watch that. It's a very good video, and it's definitely worth a watch. Now, at the time, I wasn't a content creator. I didn't even start creating content until 2021. But in my brain, I was all like, if I can find some Pepsi Blues, original ones, I need to buy some because I think I could make some money off of them. And I happened to win 3 of them that were in an auction for just $25. It was a crazy steal. They were in an auction. What happened is I went on to sell 2 out of 3 of them for $120. I think one was for $120. The other one was $100. I think the 121 I profited roughly $100. The one for $100 I profited roughly $80. And then the third one broke. I did sell it, but it broke. So the deal didn't go through. And then later on, the same seller that I won those from posted a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi Blue for $80. Boom! I bought that one. And I knew that that one was going to go up in value. And I listed it on eBay for $160. And it took me 3 years to sell that 2-liter bottle. But I knew it was going to sell because it was way more valuable. If you can find a 2-liter vintage bottle of Pepsi Blue, they're far more valuable than these 1 liters or 20-ounce bottles because they're so much harder to find. And so I made about $60 off of that one. So 2018 was when the LA Beast had made that video. 2019 was when Parker had posted that video, Pepsi Blue Movement. And then 2021 was when the official re-released version of Pepsi Blue had come out. Now, there were a few people that came along that made some very tangible videos about it, such as the LA Beast. He'd done a taste test comparison of a vintage one to a modern day one, and that spiked a lot of interest in Pepsi Blues. Before Pepsi Blue had been re-released, people were already interested in these vintage bottles because of the LA Beast posting that viral video that had a Pepsi Blue that was featured on the thumbnail. And once Pepsi Blue was re-released, the demand for these original bottles went up again because now everybody was wanting them because they looked so much cooler than the re-released ones. Jolner made a video where he did a taste test comparison of a vintage one to a re-released version. And then later on, Blake from Industrial Industries World Radio had started posting videos about Pepsi Blue, and he's got some of the best, most tangible videos, even though he wasn't the first one to initially post vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue. And Blake would tell you that he really regrets not being in the knowing of stuff. In this case, probably not making the content sooner than later. Most people that had vintage Pepsi Blues wouldn't sell them for very large prices. At one point, people were trying to sell them for like $300, $250, $200, way overpriced. I was like, okay, I'll sell these for $120 a piece at the most, and I got away with it. Now, by the time Pepsi Blue was re-released, well, I already told you, the demand for the vintage bottles went up again. But I'd run out. I didn't have any more to sell. I was emptied. But then, a couple years ago, from 2025, there was this guy that started selling them for lower price, and I started buying a ton of them. To this day, I still have 8 vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue, and I plan on selling all of them for $120 each in good time. But now that Pepsi Blue has been discontinued for 4 years, guess what? People, they're starting to miss Pepsi Blue again. And guess what? The demand for these vintage bottles is starting to go up again. So it's not going to be a problem for me at all to sell more and more of these vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue as time goes on. But yeah, the current deal that I made with the guy on eBay, I sold a vintage bottle for $120 plus $20 in shipping. And by the time eBay paid me out, I think I had a total payout of, what was it? I want to say probably $120 is what it was. So by the time you get paid, boom, from eBay, you got to subtract another roughly $20. Boom, that's down to $100. And then you got to subtract $60 because that's how much I paid for this bottle that I just recently sold. And it's down to a pure profit of roughly $40. But it's a little bit less than that because I bought the bottle for a little bit more than $60. So this bottle I made about a profit of $37. And the previous one was about $33 that I sold about a month ago. And out of all the Pepsi Blues that I've sold, because I've sold 6 of them successfully, and if it weren't for that 7th one that broke on the shipment, which was my fault, because I wasn't near as experienced at the time, I would have had 7 confirmed bottles of Pepsi Blue up to this point that I've sold. And so I think I did the math, and by the time it's all said and done, from 2019, or from 2000 and I want to say roughly 2022 or 2020, from about 2019 till now to 2025, I've sold 6 bottles of Pepsi Blue. And the profit that I've made is roughly $371 out of the entire history of selling these vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue. So it's very close to $400. And if it weren't for that seventh bottle that broke, I would be way over 400 that I've made off of vintage bottles of Pepsi Blue. I don't know. It's just a very interesting story when it comes to Pepsi Blue. Most of you already know the story by now, so I'm not going to repeat it. But it did come out in 2002, and then it was discontinued in 2004 because of Blue Number 1. There was just this controversy over it, but it turned out to not be that big of a deal because they brought it back anyways in the re-release version. But Pepsi Blue has been a very interesting story, and if you want to do digging more on it, it gets pretty complicated somewhat because there's so many other countries that released Pepsi Blue, especially in the Asian markets. It really dominated there. And there's been Pepsi Blue that's been sold even in Mexico. Super rare version. Even if you can find a vintage bottle of Romanian Pepsi Blue, that is highly rare because that one came out even before the American version in the States in 2002. And then the Mexican version also came out before the 2002 version. Because Mexico, it's very much under the radar when it comes to released drinks, but it seems to be a very hot spot for test marketing Pepsi flavors, and they definitely did that with Pepsi Blue. And so, even in 2009, they came out with the rarest version of Pepsi Blue that was called Pepsi Weewachu. But that's a story for another time, and I've already done a video about that. But mind you guys, nearly $400 of pure profit is how much I've made off of these original bottles of Pepsi Blue. I hope that Pepsi Blue comes back at some point. I did not think that the re-released version was near as good as the old one, and they definitely did not have the ingredients even close to what the vintage bottles were in these. But it was still very tasty, and it is a drink that I will always love and miss. So Pepsi, if you're watching, bring back Pepsi Blue.